All right. Hello. Good morning, good noon, good afternoon, or good evening. It depends on the time that you're watching this. So this is a pre-advance recording of lesson six. In order for us to join, no, or in order for us to mahabol natin yung lesson natin for our midterm exams. So I'm going to skip ahead and make us understand lesson six. Lesson six is all about deontological ethics, so that after this lesson I will be able to also move on to lesson seven. So without further ado, we'll now start the lesson by taking a look at what deontological ethics is in the eye of course, Immanuel Kant. So Immanuel Kant was actually the first person that gave us a clear-cut definition of what deontological ethics is all about. So according to him, there are strict rules and duties that everyone must adhere to in a functioning society, and being ethical is simply identifying and obeying those duties and following those rules. But what does it actually mean, right? So if we're going to take a look at the definition, there is a clear-cut understanding that at the end of the lesson, you must be able to have these things. So you just read it on your own. Meron naman ako yung copy sa inyong Google Drive link. But to give you a sort of introduction before we start with the actual lesson, I'd like to tell you a story about, unfortunately, about the people were who experience a sort of humanitarian problem, which is, of course, the Tuskegee syphilis study. So, who were these people? Well, these people were a bunch of African males were experimented on. um, it's a study that happened between 1932 and 1972 by the United States Public Health Service and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So they had 400 African Americans um, that contracted syphilis. What they did was the men were not actually informed of the nature of the experiments, and then more than 100 of these men died as a result. Now, what happened here is that it's really a brutal, one of the most unethical things that has been done to humanity, because the men were initially told that the experiment was only going to last 6 months, but is now extended to at least 40 years. And then after funding for treatment that was lost, the study continued, even if they already know that, in fact, in the year 1940s, penicillin was already available, but they were not even given the fact. So the antibiotic was already available, but they became the standard treatment for syphilis, but they did not give these men. So as a result, until 1972, for almost 4 decades, imagine, almost 4 decades, the experiment still happened. So ang ginawa kasi nila is that 200 of these men were given the cure, and then 200 of these men were not given the cure, as a sort of parang dependent and independent variables. Now, this is where it gets problematic, because you can't make people variables, right? So as a result, 28 patients had died directly from syphilis. 100 died from complications because or related to syphilis. 40 of their patients' wives also were infected with syphilis, and 19 of their children were born with congenital syphilis. Now, more on this later, ladies and gentlemen. Um, para siyang introduction, makikita niyo mamaya yung relevance kung bakit yun yung introduction natin in a while. Bakit isa siya sa mga pinaka-atrocious, pinaka-unethical things that has happened throughout the history of, experimentation of human beings. So, let's first try to understand who Immanuel Kant is. If you're going to take a look at the PowerPoint right here, there are no actual texts, so you need to really listen to this lecture right here. Now, who was Immanuel Kant? Immanuel Kant was actually a very interesting person of interest when it comes to philosophy, because he understood that the idea of religion was really, it's really important. But he was not a religious man per se. But he understood that religion is very important as an aspect of human beings. He was born in Western Europe, and he was not actually a very rich man. Right, he was a broke person. He only became actually a philosopher when he was around 50 years old. So he was known for understanding, pointing out that religion has a great impact in humanity. Although not a religious person, he understood that the context of religion helps humanity understand who they are or what they are as human beings. So naintindihan niya nga po, no, yung relevance ng religion, that it helps human beings understand who they are. It builds, it builds the rational man understanding who they are, etc., etc. But Immanuel Kant was known to be a person who is not conventionally religious. And because he was a party person, he actually only became a philosopher at 50 years old, like I said. So, pero he lived until 80 years old, which is nice. So, naging nagkaroon pa siya ng 30 years of experience in being a philosopher. And what did Immanuel Kant do? So he created what he calls now the categorical imperative. But before the categorical imperative, he first had this what he calls now hypothetical imperatives. Now, suppose that you were a person who wants money, right? As an example. So what do you do? Well, of course, you work for it, right? Or if you want to have high grades, according to Immanuel Kant, or not really according to Immanuel Kant, but as an analogy, if you want to have high grades, you need to study, right? You need to work on it. Hindi ka aasa sa procrastination, hindi ka aasa sa katabi mo sa exam, hindi ka aasa sa friend mo. So what he calls these things are hypothetical imperatives. There are two things that presupposes his understanding of the world. First is the hypothetical imperatives, and second is the categorical imperatives. Now let's first go on to understanding hypothetical imperatives first. Um, the problem with hypothetical imperatives is it's only dependent on the desires. It's contingent on our desires. So suppose I would ask you again the same question. Um, if you want money, then you work for it. So what about if you don't want money and you don't want to work for it? So wala ka nang gagawin, right? Kasi hindi mo nga desire yun. Or for example, if you study hard or if you don't want to study hard, then you will not really work for it. You will resort to cheating, you will resort to, having your friend, or you will resort to, doing something, creating códigos, whatnot. But most of the time, whether we are not ought to do something, is it really a moral choice? Instead, it's just contingent on our desires. But hypothetical imperatives, therefore, are only about prudence rather than about morality. And this is where it gets interesting because Immanuel Kant is trying now to tell us that if we only follow certain things based on our desires, what will happen? Now, alam na natin yun in the past lessons, right? Plato told us that if we don't have some sort of temperament or sorry moderation, no, if we don't do things in moderation, then our appetite will go haywire and we do unethical things. That's the hypothetical imperative is all about. Now the most famous Immanuel Kant was known was actually not about his hypothetical imperatives but because of his categorical imperatives. In the age of reason, no, in the age of revolutionary liberal ideas came forward, he wrote a paper regarding reason. And according to Immanuel Kant, it's the most important thing aspect of a person, to level it out to understand who we are as human beings. So he tried to understand, he tried to question the relevance of reason and religion and how unique it is as a perspective for us human beings. Now, he tried to question God, even tried to, decapitate the idea of that God. Not really like decapitate, but try to understand that what happens. Why is it that most of the rules of religion make sense, di ba? So, although hindi siya religious person, he heavily relied his ideas on the commandments of the church or the religious aspect of the church, as like what I said. Hence, he called this his categorical imperative. And he made this in the groundworks of the metaphysics of morals. When he wrote this, he had two categorical imperatives. The first one is, it goes like this: acts only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Now, if you're going to take a look at it, hindi siya maintindihan, right? It's really complicated. It's such a complicated line, right? You wouldn't understand what it means. The most parang siguro the best thing that we can interpret is na lang, the best line that I can interpret this is like, do unto others as you would have done unto you. Let's do an experiment. Suppose that you are in an office and you steal from the office pero tingi-tingi lang, 'di ba? Tingi-tingi lang. Um if that will happen, of course, if everyday kang kukuha ng something na supplies sa office, tingi-tingi, someone will have to check on you na, di ba? Ibig sabihin nun is like, if everyone does it, sabi nga ni Immanuel Kant, if it is acceptable by the entire society, if there's a universal rule that says okay lang na mag-cheat, okay lang na mag-steal, then of course, we have to accept it. But of course, hindi pwede yun. It's as if trying to say that if you are a human being who is allowing yourself to cheat, then you also allow yourself to get cheated on. So he puts us into a perspective that says, universally speaking, there needs to be a rule. Diba? That's the very first categorical imperative. There needs to be a rule that if it is generally acceptable by everyone, then it is good. But if it is not generally acceptable by anyone, or if you don't want it to happen to you, then don't do it as well. That's the first categorical imperative. The second categorical imperative speaks, act so as to treat people always as ends in themselves, never as mere means. Ladies and gentlemen, do you still remember the very first introduction that I had you, yung ating Tuskegee syphilis experiments? The US Department of Health during that time used these people as mere means. Ang sinasabi ni Immanuel Kant sa atin, hindi pwede yon. Bakit? Because we as human beings, we should take a look at ourselves as if we're looking at a mirror, right? So kung gusto mong bastusin ang isang tao, consider yourself as nabastos na rin for that matter. So let's himay-himay natin yung categorical imperatives. What is the first formulation trying to tell us? Act according to that maxim which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law without contradiction. So what does he mean by this? What is a maxim? This is what he calls now the universalizability principle. Haba, no? Universalizability principle. A maxim is a rule or a principle of action. It's a written rule. And universal law is something that has done always in similar situations. So the rule is, according to Immanuel Kant, we cannot create laws that everyone defies because that law that does not make sense. So if it's okay to cheat, if everyone accepts it, then it is, well, good. But if it's not generally okay to cheat, then of course don't do it, right? If it is not acceptable by everyone, then it's not good at all. Napaka-absolutist, di ba? Napaka-absolutist. Now, the second categorical imperative is also what he calls now the formula of humanity. All of us here in this world are ends in ourselves. Pag sinabi mo kasing mere means, you are only using it for your own benefit with no thought to the interest or benefit of the thing that you're using. Sa madaling salita, ginagamit mo lang yung tao. Minamanipulate mo, ginagawa mong object, ginagawa mo para sa sarili mo. So kaibigan mo lang siya kapag math. Kaibigan mo lang siya kapag pag may kailangan ka. No? That's wrong, according to Immanuel Kant. According to Immanuel Kant, we are not mere objects that exist to be used by others. We are our own ends, and we are rational and autonomous, and we have the ability to set our own goals and work toward them. In fact, he would also push this idea that all of us here have what we call now autonomy. And the way you understand this is that, yun na nga, no, para siyang sinasabi na if you want to treat others with respect, or you want yourself to be treated with respect, then treat others with respect at the same time. Or so yun nga, do unto others what you don't want to be done, do unto others what you want done unto you. Or in the negative side, or the plus side, would be do not do unto others what you don't want done unto you. Same is true with Jesus's greatest commandment, one of the two greatest commandments na sinasabi, di ba, na love your enemies or love your neighbors as you love yourself. That's the universalizability principle and the categorical imperative at once. Because unlike other things in this world, we are self-governed. We're able to set our own ends, to make our own free decisions based on our rational wills. We cannot be used because we are not objects at all. We are subjects. Tandaan niyo yun. Sorry, sinapakpag. Because this imbues us with an absolute moral worth, which means that we shouldn't be manipulated, nor must we manipulate other autonomous agents for our own benefits. Remember these guys? They were used as mere means, ladies and gentlemen. And pangit yun. Masama yun. Unethical yun. It's worse than the type of people who created some sort of analogy of why they do this. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, if pansin nyo, no, most of our experimentation na hindi na pwede ang human experimentation, only if it is approved, only if there is consent, only if there is some sort of parang yun na nga, consent, no, form for that. No. So let's try to understand the world. There is a difference between a subject and an object. Sorry, narinig na ba yung ulan? Medyo malakas na yung ulan doon. Sana safe kayo dyan, guys. Anyway, in this world, we are not objects, we are subjects, right? There's a movie here, but I'm gonna let you watch it na lang sa YouTube later on, no? I mean, isa ko na yung links. Meron tayong tinatawag na intersubjectivity. What does it mean? It is the condition of a man or a woman who is a subject among other men or women who are also subjects. Sa madaling salita, yung relationship mo sa ibong kapwang tao. Sorry, sa iyong kapwang tao. Diba? So that is what we call intersubjectivity. There is this philosopher whose name is Martin Buber, and he is famous for his philosophy of dialogue. He is an Austrian-born Israeli-Jewish philosopher. Ano, ganda combo, no? Austrian-born pero Israeli pero Jewish, 'di ba? Philosopher. And according to Martin Buber, the world is not comprehensible sometimes, but it is embraceable. Mahirap daw po siyang hagkan. I mean, sorry, mahirap siyang intindihin, pero kayang-kaya nating hagkan. Paano? Through embracing one of its beings, which is us. We are subjects. We are not objects, ladies and gentlemen. So you have to always remember that. Because all real living thing or real living is meeting. And all actual life is an encounter. That's where it gets more interesting in a short while. Now, meron siyang tinatawag na philosophy of dialogue. And dialogue is a deep and genuine relationship between persons. It happens when two persons truly acknowledge each other's presence and treat each other's as equal or treat each other as equals. It stems out from this relationship because ang mahirap sa atin, no, is that meron tayong dalawang klaseng relationship. The I-it versus the I-thou relationship. Now, an I-it relationship happens to be when you treat other as mere objects and you see yourself as the only subject. So, mahirap yon. So, ibig sabihin, kaibigan mo lang siya kapag may kailangan ka. No? Ik-es relationship. It refers to the world of experience and sensation where there are objects and the beings do not actually meet because the I confronts or qualifies an idea or conceptualization of the being in its presence and treats that as an object rather than a subject. So, marami ka dito. For example, toxic relationship. Kailangan mo lang siya pag, kailangan mo yung physical body niya. Or kaibigan mo lang siya pag may need ka sa math. Or, like genuine ka lang kapag may kailangan ka dun sa person. You treat that person as a mere object. Now, there are many I-it relationships. These are what we call transactional relationships. Like, for example, teacher-student. So, of course, hindi naman pwedeng maging beyond ang relationship ng teacher at student. The teacher needs to teach, the student needs to learn. Yun na yun, I-it relationship. But if you create illicit relationships, then masama yun, di ba? Unethical yun. Attorney-client privileges, di ba? Those are I-it relationships. You need the person, you will use the person for your own benefit. Okay lang yun, kasi nga trabaho nila yun. But of course, if you go beyond that, no, that's where it gets that is where it gets problematic. Now, on to more pressing issues. An I-it relationship happens to be a wrong relationship if hindi dapat transactional ang relationship niyo. For example, romantic relationships or let's say husbands and wives, di ba? They can't treat each other as objects because if they treat each other as objects, they now try to negate the second categorical imperative of Immanuel Kant. So yun naman, pag nag-aasawa, for example, of course, you treat each other as equals. You don't see a person, you don't objectify the person, you don't also manipulate the person. And that is wrong, right? That is very wrong because this relationship is not a dialogue, it is a monologue. Ikaw lang ang main character at hindi kayong dalawa. And that is problematic. Now, kapag sinabi natin I-thou relationship, it's the ik-do relationship, diba? It refers to the world encounters and relationships where there are now persons. Hindi lang transactional yung relationship niyo. It is a concrete encounter without any qualification nor any objectification of another. It is a life of a dialogue. So, you treat each other as ends in themselves. So, hindi lang dahil kaibigan mo siya kasi may kailangan ka, but you see the worth of that person, you see the dignity of that person, regardless of what type of relationship you have with that person. And it's kind of weird that most relationships now do not end up with either relationship. But according to Martin Buber, you can only become I through the thou, right? Through the thou, a person becomes I. Through selflessness, you actually understand how it is to be a human person. But if you are a selfish person, if you act upon ego only, if you relate only to some sort of relevance to yourself and as if you're trying to say na, okay, I'm the main character, wala kang pakialam sa kanila, dead ma ako sa kanila, patumba ko sila lahat. Hindi ganun. Mahirap yon. So, what is Immanuel Kant now trying to tell us in everything that is happening? We should do our duty for no other reason because that is the right thing to do. He is an absolutist. According to him, obeying the rules for self-interest because it will only lead us to consequences or even because it makes us happy is not an idea for deontologists because we should be motivated by our respect for the moral law itself. And deontology, therefore, most deontologists require us to follow universal rules we give to ourselves, not be hypocrites. Yun na yun, diba? So these rules must be in accordance with reason. In particular, they must be logically consistent and not give rise to any contradiction. So for example, di ba maraming ganun? For example, may mga politicians who are creating anti-graft and corruption laws pero sila mismo graft. I mean, corrupt sila, di ba? It's kind of ironic, right? So no, don't contradict yourself. Now, the second one, therefore, the understanding is the appeal to deontology are not in line with the inconsistent. Kaya nga siya deontology because it is your duty to do good regardless of the consequences. By focusing on a person's intentions, it also places ethics entirely within our control. We can't always control or predict the outcomes of our actions, but we are in complete control of our intentions. And that is important. Ladies and gentlemen, if you ask for a person, why are you doing this to me? Ano bang intention mo? Ba't mo ginagawa to sa akin? Di ba? Kung ang rason niya is hindi para sa iyo, then of course it will shatter whatever is happening in your relationship, di ba? So yun yung maganda doon. Now, sort of an advertisement, ladies and gentlemen, when I was in college, yan ako, no, nung college ako. Diba? Um, napaka-absolutist pala nung aming ideologies. Bakit, kamo? Kasi nga yung aming logo or yung aming, well, I don't know, I was skinny back then. No? Makikita niyo siya, no? So, typical student, nag-aaral, tapos nag-org, diba? Tapos nag-serve sa church, etc. etc. Now, ito yung aming um, logo right here. So let me just um pointer. Ayan, ayan, ayan. So this is our logo right here. So Public Administration Legal Management, Fiat Justicia Ruat Kailo. That was me. Look at that person right there. Anyway, so Fiat Justicia Ruat Kailom sabi nung aming ano no. So that was me. Anyway. Yeah. Why did I zoom on that? Anyway, there we go. So, ang kanyang translation is, of course, let justice be done, though the heavens may fall. Diba? So, ano ibig sabihin nun? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to do this. Yeah. So, let justice be done though heavens may fall. Yun ang isang deontological viewpoint. Like, regardless of what happens, justice must prevail. Diba? So it's kind of like the categorical and imperative as well of Immanuel Kant, that all of the things that we are doing resembles a certain attribute to the world that if it is not done, regardless of the consequences, something must be done. Parang ganon. So, kahit na, for example, si Robin Hood, the fictional character, hindi pa rin siya mabait para sa mga deontologists kasi nga po, yung intention niya, I mean, okay yung intention niya, which is good, pero yung kanyang acts, ano yung kanyang acts? Siya ay nagnanakaw. Di ba? So, something like that. I mean, I mean, safe to say that even if nakaka-deontological, nung aming approach sa aming org, we know for a fact that what we are doing is not for ourselves, but for the entire, community. Not only inside the classroom, but also outside the classroom. And that is a very, very, I think medyo proud naman ako sa feat na meron kami doon, or feature na may. Now, let's go back to the lesson. Now, that's the positive attribute of deontological ethics na, yes, regardless, we should do this, regardless of the consequences, we should be good. Now, what can be the negative aspect naman of deontological ethics? First, medyo paradoxical siya. Why? Because, um, one hurdle is to confront the apparent fact that careful reflection about the degrees of wrongdoing that are possible under any single norm does not make it easy to see the deontological morality as consisting of general, canonically formulated texts. Rather, such apparently simple texts such as "Thou shalt not murder" look more like mere epistemic aids summarizing a much more nuanced and detailed moral reality. What does it mean? Now, "Thou shalt not kill," right? That's absolute. But what if I need to kill to save myself, 'di ba? So that's self-defense, 'di ba? So ibig sabihin therefore, yung mga tao therefore na pumatay kasi nga pinoprotektahan nila yung sarili nila, are they necessarily bad people already? Are they necessarily unethical people already? Or for example, you are really in danger and you have to do something bad in order for you to be saved. Or you need to lie in order for a person to be saved. So yun na, medyo pa. Doon. Yung tinatawag nila ngayon na paradox of relative stringency. Because there is an aura of paradox in asserting that all deontological duties are categorical to be done no matter the consequences, and yet asserting that some of such duties are more stringent than the others. Yun yung sinasabi natin. So, medyo mahirap maging deontological kapag sinabi mo na, oh, gawin mo yan kasi duty mo yan. Eh, di ba? What if, yeah, I will do this pero may other things, may other consequences. What if the consequences will really matter? Eh, sabi ng mga deontological people, consequences do not matter. So yun yung paradox of relative stringency. Yun na nga. For example, if lying is an absolute moral wrong, how are we going to deal with officious lies as suggested by Thomas Aquinas? Or if killing is an absolute moral wrong, what about those who murdered or who involuntary manslaughtered because of self-defense, di ba? So what would I do, for example, if I know that it is wrong to hack, but my hacking skills is needed to stop a nuclear launch that will end up killing millions of people? Yun yung problema sa deontology. Second, authority from which duty is required is difficult to be determined. The second hurdle is that medyo inevitable yung question natin sa authority. Tama naman yun. Pero saan nanggaling? Di ba? So if it is from a God, which God? Right? Is it the Catholic God? Is it the Christian born-again God? Is the Muslim God? Etc. etc. Because even in a theistic commitment, they may prefer to join Kant's insistence that ethics proceeds from reason alone, even in a theistic world. What about those atheistic world? Like, okay, like yung mga hindi naniniwala. Okay, hindi naman sinabi ng Diyos yan eh, etc. etc. And di ba din yung problema, right? That if we only base our actions on, let's say, sacred scriptures or authoritative measures, then medyo pwede natin questionin yun. Ang sinasabi kasi ni Immanuel Kant doon, hindi natin pwedeng questionin yun. It is already written, you just need to follow it. Diba? So, an example of that would be if it is my duty to do good things because someone said so, who is responsible for imposing these duties? Di ba? Or if it is by a God, which one? If not, then who said it then? If it's not from a God? Or what authority or power is being possessed by whoever or whatever said that it is my duty or a duty to be good? Di ba? So doon tayo nagkakaroon ng medyo problema. And finally, the third problem with deontology is an obligation is viewed differently by each individual, whether they are rational or not. It only means here for that when we deal with it is that parang ano siya eh, para siyang relative lang. Because it exists even if the first two are crossed adequately. This hurdle is to deal with the seeming demand of deontological ethics that on occasion, one's categorical obligations require one to preserve the purity of one's own moral agency. I mean, sobrang nalilito na siguro kayo, no? Pero ito yung example dyan. That's what we call now the principle of avoidtion. Avoidtion is the manipulation of means. For example, using omissions, foresight, risk, allowings, aidings, or redirectings to achieve permissibly what otherwise deontological morality would forbid. A perfect example of principle of avoidance is that if it is my duty to do good things because someone said so, why are there so many people who are still not doing good things? Like, okay, doon na lang ako sa mga taong hindi gumagawa ng mabuti, right? Or if man by nature is already a rational animal, wouldn't he be already good in the first place and not needed to be reminded of these things? Or why do I have to be good when others are benefiting from being bad? Yun yung problema sa deontological ethics. Sana tumatak sa inyong mga kokote yun, no? But one thing is for sure, according to Immanuel Kant, sabi niya may doctrine tayo ng prima facie duties. Prima facie duties in its face, no? Hindi mo ako kailangan questionin, basta sundin mo lang ako. No? So sabi nga niya, medyo mahirap yon because the prima facie duty is some kind of danger collapsing into a kind of consequentialism. What does it mean? If you only do good things because it is your duty to do so, what if you don't feel it as your duty? Right? What if, for example, kayo siguro nasa bed pa rin, no? So, sinabot na kayo ng nanay nyo, tapos kakain na. And then what if ayaw mo pa rin? Eh pero kailangan mo kumain. O, di ba? You have a choice not to join. You have the choice not to eat. You have the choice not to do whatever you don't do it. Sorry. So in short, no matter what type of good or bad thing you do, there will always be consequences to the act. Yun kasi yung problema. And the consequences that of which are important to be determined whether the agent must act within the realm of goodness or badness regardless of the intentions. So that is the problem. Pero magre-result tayo into what he calls now moral catastrophes. Sometimes doing what is morally right will have tragic results, but allowing such tragic results is also necessary to occur. It's still the right thing to do. Yun yung point ni Immanuel Kant. Itatawag niyang moral catastrophes. Remember our quote, fiat justitia ruat caelum. Let justice be done though the heavens fall. O kahit maliwindang na daw ang heavens, kailangan pa rin may hustisya. Now, complying with moral norms will surely be difficult on those occasions, but the moral norms apply nonetheless with full force, overriding all other considerations. So, matigas talaga ulo ni Manuel Kant. Yeah. Okay lang. So for Immanuel Kant, yeah, masama ka pa rin kahit pumatay ka kasi kahit pumatay ka because of self-defense kasi pumatay ka pa rin. Huwag ka pa rin daw mag-hack. Kasi hacking is still wrong kasi that's getting information that is against the will of the person. Kasi nga hacking is still wrong even if it will save millions. So for a deontologist, well, wala kang choice kundi, be absolutely following the rules. Sabi nga yan, no, better the whole people should perish than injustice be done. Same is true, no? Dun sa aming quote, 'di ba? No aming dating organization na Palm Legis, that justice be done though the heavens may fall. So medyo absolutist siya. But despite the essence of having moral catastrophes, we ought to still do moral things that will ultimately bring about happiness. Yun naman yung point ni Manuel Kant. The absolute moral criteria that we always chase is not bound only within our duty, but our desire to be happy and contented with what we are doing. That's the relevance naman of deontology. So if it makes you happy, then of course do it. Right? Morality is not the doctrine of how we make ourselves happy, but how we make ourselves worthy of happiness, to quote Immanuel Kant. That concludes our lesson for today. If you can, if you want to have more, no, ayan, may mga links tayo dyan. For the next meeting, for the next video lecture, try natin i-understand yung lesson 7. So if you have questions, do not hesitate to ask your beadles para mapunta sa akin yung mga tanong, or, just chat me. But, it takes 2 to 3 business days for me to reply. You know that. So yeah, see you in the next video. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something today. And yeah, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Depends on the time that you're watching this. All right. Ayun na po. Goodbye.